Hello, this is my first blog. I'm currently on the IBITA course, which is being held in Newcastle, and this is a course run for Bobath tutors, international, from all around the world, as well as instructor candidates who are training to be Bobath tutors. And the title of this course that I'm on is Understanding the Complexity of Postural Control for the Functional Recovery of Locomotion. So we started yesterday, and I have to say it's been a fabulous course so far. Only one day in out of 4, so I'm just about to go off for breakfast on the second day, and I just thought I'd catch up a little bit about yesterday's experience. We've got 24 participants on the course, and like I say, it's a mix of Bobath tutors, both basic course instructors and advanced course instructors, and also our instructor candidates who are training to be tutors. And what we did yesterday was really look into the in the theoretical component in the lecture, which was presented by Monica Morelli from Italy. She really took us through the very interesting subject of the evolution of bipedal locomotion, and we looked very specifically at the changes around the pelvis from our most close cousins, other great apes, and the changes around the pelvis and how that links into the size of our base of support when we're standing, where our feet are, and how that ability to have a smaller base of support allows us as Homo sapiens to really produce a very cost-effective walking pattern, which enables us to go for further and faster, using up less energy. So that was really great. Some of her work there was drawing on the papers by Lovejoy, and what I found really interesting was the detail around the thoracic area and how the alignment of the thorax over the pelvis has changed so much from other great apes, such as the gorilla and the chimpanzee, which Monica Morelli says that word chimpanzee so beautifully because she's Italian. She goes chimpanzee, which is lovely to hear all the way through a lecture. And looking at where the thorax is placed over the pelvis, which allows the more upright gait and the postural control in preparation for single leg stance, which of course is a key necessity when you only have 2 legs. You have to be able to achieve a very successful single leg stance. And then that's obviously led into the organisation of our head posture, and how that enables us to do 2 things: keep our head still and stable, but also allow it to be free to look around. So these are key features of being human. So that was really fascinating. And then from there, the lecture took us into the biomechanics of gait, and the linkage there with the postural control, and how the postural control, maintaining our ability to be upright against gravity, actually how that feeds so specifically into the biomechanics of gait. So that was brilliant. Then we looked at the patient presentation and the neuropathological difficulties that the patient has in their walking pattern, linking that directly to both the postural control and the dynamics of the gait pattern. And that took us back to then thinking about the main aspects of our application of the theory of the bipedal gait, the biomechanics, and the pathophysiology of the patient into patient treatment. So it was an excellent lecture, thoroughly enjoyable, and expertly presented. And then we went into our practical, which again was immensely enjoyable. We had Mary Lynch Ellerington, who presented a very exciting postural set to work in, long sitting with feet against the wall, and using this, first of all, preparing the person in that position, which, as you could imagine, is quite a challenging position for many of us because of the demand of length throughout the, not just the biomechanical system, but the neural system, with your legs in long sitting and your body upright, 90 degrees at your hips and pelvis. And then looking at how this position can really lend itself into specific organisation and activation of the thorax. So really enjoyed that. I worked with Samuel, who is one of our Spanish tutors and also the secretary of IBITA, and really enjoyed working on his head organisation and the disassociation of his left shoulder complex and head and neck combination to enable more selective scapular alignment and activation and a freer head, which for me truly linked into the theoretical component that we'd had in the morning about the nature of Homo sapien and the importance of a stable head, which Samuel's wasn't, because, well, of course, stable enough for him to function, but when you went into the specifics of it, his head was being pulled to the left whenever he was required to create a reach pattern with his protracting scapula, and therefore wasn't as free. But for me as well was very much feeding into his orientation of his head and the length of his reach, because he was very surprised to hear when we were working that where he thought the middle was for his head alignment wasn't actually, when he was reaching, a good midline orientation. So it really linked into the freedom of the head for the function of the human. And I think when we bring that to our patients and you extrapolate that to a more extreme level of lack of dissociation, then you can really see how the organisation of head alignment and deep neck stabilisers for the postural control of the head is very much affected when our patients are reaching. So I found that very, very informative and very exciting. And our next practical today, we just started at the end of yesterday, starting to look at the specific organisation and activation of the linear extension in sitting at the pelvis. So we're picking that up today. So looking forward to that. The other good thing about today, day 2 on this ITC module, is that we meet our patients today. So this afternoon we'll be working in groups of 3 with a patient, and that should be very exciting because we'll be able to really have a go to deepen our analysis using the model of Bobath clinical practice, which is being rolled out now on all our Bobath courses in the UK over the last couple of years, and really using our clinical reasoning to plan a treatment forwards over the next few days with our patients. So it's been a great day yesterday and I'm looking forward to this morning. Just off for breakfast now. Okay, speak to you later. Bye. Good morning. Hello. Hi. It's the 3rd day of the Tutors and Tutor Instructor Candidate course that I'm on at the in Newcastle, and it's just the start of the 3rd day. I'm just doing my blog about yesterday before I go for breakfast, but I just wanted to catch up about yesterday's work. It was a great day, really thoroughly enjoyed it. The whole day really brought everything together regarding the kinetic chain that we've been focusing on in the practicals. So our practical that we returned to yesterday morning was about basically looking at the alignment of the lower limbs, understanding that the cerebellum really needs to receive symmetrical proprioceptive information from a pair of legs, and if we have a leg that's particularly malaligned or difficult in its activation, then that's going to be very much a different reception of the sensory information at the cerebellum, and therefore affect the descending drive into the legs. And the practical was led by Helen Lindfield, and she took us through assessment of standing and looking at hip alignment and hip activation and into single leg stance. And then we broke off into pairs, and I had the pleasure of working with a gentleman called Mr. Suzuki from the Japanese team, and he's training to be an advanced course instructor, advanced tutor, and very much enjoyed working with him. He had quite a difficult presentation with his legs, a very stiff and adaptively shortened iliotibial band and tensor fascial lata down his lateral aspects of his legs, and consequently walking with very wide and rotated outwards feet, and a reduction in his general extension around his pelvis. So it was great to work on him, and enjoyed understanding his hip alignment and taking him into single leg stance and working him quite hard. And then really enjoyed it because then Mary came over and worked with me and with Helen, and all three of us on poor Mr. Suzuki's legs, and we really worked him up into a better stand, and took him down from stand to sit with stabilisation at his knees to gain the length of his pelvis away from his legs. And then Helen and Mary went back into some of the multifidus work that we were doing earlier on in the day, really generating the linear extension from his down very low at his sacrum, and from that activating multifidus where it begins at the lumbar vertebra, and using that to help him create that propulsion up onto his feet, which went really well. And then from that taking him up into propulsion, so the plantar flexor activity that takes you up onto your tiptoes, and that was really explosive for his sense of extensor drive and activity, which was a very different experience for him from his normal stand. And the changes in his stand, his posture and standing, were just really exciting, because for me one of the biggest things that I could see was the alteration in his arm position. So prior to the work in the practical session, he had been very much with his arms in a kind of outward position, quite active in their static posture, not pendular and dangling and resting in against, by his side against his legs, but very much away, hovering away from his legs, until we changed this ability for him to realign the extensor abductor components around his hips through the alteration of the tensor fascial lata adaptation, and give him that extensor drive. And all of a sudden his hips were wide, and less flexion at the anterior aspect of his hips, and he had lateral rotation in his femurs. He had better aligned neutral alignment of his femurs, which allowed him to gain that better extension, and his arms were pendular and dangling by his side. But the most exciting thing was the walking that we saw after that, because Mr. Suzuki, and to be honest, a number of the Japanese do have this component of lateral rotation and reduction in heel strike. Well, they've got heel strike, but a sense of legs walking in a much more flexed posture, possibly from the way that they spend more time in cross-legged sitting and in that very low down squat sitting that they all sit and rest in. But his walking after this was upright, extension, propulsion, pendular arms, really nice, and he got a round of applause from the group. We really felt that he had evolved into a much more extended posture, and he felt, or his cerebellum really felt the difference. So that was thoroughly enjoyable, and I very much enjoyed working with Helen Linfield and Mary Lynch Ellerington around that practical, and it really enhanced my learning of, you know, the feeling, the realignment of that extensor abductor mechanism around the hips was great. So that was that. But then we had a great patient demonstration too in the day. A young man called Michael, who is only 22 and had his traumatic brain injury 3 years ago, and Helen Linfield led the demonstration with Mary joining her, and this young gentleman was very able to explain to us verbally the difficulties he felt he had around his left side. He was bilaterally affected from his traumatic brain injury, but his left side was very difficult for him, although it registered with him as his stronger side. In standing, he actually told us that he hated being on his left, and he couldn't understand why. He had no idea, he said, why being on his left side in stance was so difficult for him. And I loved the way the subjective cues that he gave us really linked into the objective findings in the clinical analysis, because Helen and Mary discovered that the difficulty with soft tissue adaptation and, again, flexor drive through his right leg was stopping him being able to truly get onto his left leg. And when they organised the right leg better and got him onto his left leg better, there was a moment in the demonstration where the revelation of his left trunk was like that happened. Prior to the better standing on two legs, his trunk, we could see there were alignment issues, but not so dramatic. And once they created a pair of better aligned legs for this young man to stand on, then we could see a very definite flexor activating left trunk, probably part of the pushing kind of strategy that he had been using, and the inability for those very stiff left ribs, left thorax to create linear extension was really clear. So it was nice that the layers of his compensatory strategies were tackled and revealed this quite primary impairment of his left trunk. And then the work that they did around that was fabulous to see. Really nice work into the trunk, really good work into his sit to stand, stand to sit. And again, Michael himself told us subjectively the differences he was feeling. He at one stage he said, wow, that's a very different feeling. And his verbal interpretation of the improved alignment that we could see and the impact that was having on his cerebellum was great. So I really enjoyed that. The walking at the end of the demo was significantly different. He had, again, more pendular arms, less associated reaction. His legs were more free to flow forwards and heel strike instead of the flexor drive that he had through his right leg at the beginning. So that was a thoroughly enjoyable demonstration. And then the discussion afterwards was great. I really benefited from the discussion afterwards, where Mary pulled out for us some of the key physiological things that we'd seen. And for me, one of my learning moments there was a conversation that we were having as a group, and Mary was discussing the definition of associated reactions by Walsh. And of course, Walsh talks about associated reactions being the automatic postural response in muscles that have lost their voluntary control. And it was really nice to look at this gentleman because he has voluntary control in his arms, but he also has a huge postural problem. And we could see that the associated reactions, despite the relatively high level function of his arms. This gentleman was putting his socks and shoes on independently, but with a postural component difficulty in that. Despite this level of function in his upper limbs and fingers and hands, the associated reaction was present when there was a postural demand in his walking. And this really linked in with the Walsh definition, and that without this higher level voluntary control, his arms are at the behest of the vestibular system in his walking, and the vestibular drive is causing the flexion in his arms. So the discussions we had around that was really nice. And so, of course, for this gentleman, a big postural control issue that needs to be dealt with, and then using that to really drive the corticospinal control into his higher skilled function for him would really help him to deal with that associated reaction. So that was great. All the neurophysiological discussions after that patient demo were very enjoyable. So it was a great day, really focusing on the kinetic chain. We went from multifidus activation up onto feet, propulsion. We saw the whole kinetic chain treated in the patient demo, and we saw the big changes to Mr. Suzuki by dealing with the alignment around his pelvis and activation of his legs, and pulling all that together with the physiology. It was a great learning experience, so thoroughly enjoyable. So today, we also met our own patients yesterday, and I'm hoping that I can perhaps be we're in groups of threes, so one of our group of three led the session yesterday, and it'll be up to either me or the other tutor to lead the session today, and the alternate one of us to do it tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to today. All right, so I'm off for breakfast, and I will catch up with you later. Bye. Hi, hello, it's Tuesday morning, and this is my third blog about the ITC course that I'm on, which is the course for tutors and tutor trainees in Newcastle. And I just thought I'd catch up with you about yesterday's sessions before I go off to start the day. Today's the last day of the course, but I'll blog about that tomorrow. So yesterday we had a great day. We had the third day of the course, like I say, and we started off the day with Monica Morelli leading the practical, and the focus of the practical was really trying to improve the idea around organisation and stabilisation of the pelvis and the sacral components of the pelvis, and really considering the importance of the length and the stabilisation of quadratus lumborum. So that was really good. We saw Monica step by step take us through stand to sit and down into working in sitting, really symmetrical sit, so that we could concentrate on the organisation of the pelvis. And we saw her take us also up into dissociating two legs and taking us into long sitting and then down into supine. So it was a really nice practical and showed a really good sequence of movement components to keep that really active postural set from standing down into sitting. And I think for me what was really nice was the skilled handling that showed the way that she could help her model be entirely active and really effective in a postural set of supine. So that was great. I worked with my colleague Makoto Kinimoto, which was great because Makoto and I know each other very well, and I really enjoyed helping to understand the analysis of his two separate legs and organising his ability to create that lateral tilt around his left leg by, in actual fact, dealing with the pushing kind of behaviour of his right foot. So that was good fun. Very much improved the extension and abduction control around his left hip, and he felt that his single leg stance was quite different at the end of that practical, so that was lovely. Took him down into long sitting, and that left us in a position ready to deal with the next practical, which was led by Lena from Sweden, and she very expertly took us into the activation of the intrinsic muscles as a strong corticospinal excitatory stimulus to enable the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles to powerfully produce a good movement control at the foot, which of course is the kind of initiation of patterned movement at the leg. So Lena really focused on the intrinsic muscles and the way that we would handle those muscles to create a really good length and activation, and into the lateral border of the foot and abductor digiti minimi, and had a very good result there too. With it was actually me that was the model, and feeling her stimulation into my abductor digiti minimi and the sense of width that I had at my foot was really great. A great opportunity to feel that as a model. And then Mary Lynch Ellerington used my better foot contact on the floor to take me up into single leg stance and really strengthen my right hip and reduce the flexor fixation that I have a little bit at my right hip. So I felt very strong at the end of the day on my right leg, with both my foot, the lateral border of the foot, the intrinsics, the core of my foot, and my abduction and extension at my right hip really having been worked on. It felt like quite a different sensory proprioceptive experience through my leg, which was great to feel that. And the patient demo yesterday with Michael, our gentleman that we'd seen the day before, again that was led by Monica Morelli, and Mary Lynch Ellerington worked with her to work on the demo situation, and it was really great. Again, Monica step by step fractionated the selective movement at both his upper limbs after a good stand to sit, very symmetrical on the bench, and the fractionation of his upper limbs so that he was really able to have free arms away from his trunk, enabled her to really generate excellent linear extension around his trunk, which brought him up into a fantastic symmetrical stand, developed, again speaking to his central nervous system about a pair of legs through the sensory information they were delivering. And the patient demo kind of, the highlight of it was really concentrating on the position within locomotion when you have heel strike on the front foot as it is just loading, and the end stage stance on the back foot when you're up into that toe off forefoot stabilizing through the propulsion of the plantar flexors. So that moment in time in the walking pattern is really a point of great height of the centre of mass, and requires a huge amount of strength, because you've got dorsiflexion control on one leg and plantar flexor control on the other leg, and that kind of two-legged stance at that moment is a precarious place that requires balance. So they worked Michael very well in that position, and the generation of extension up through his trunk was great to see. And then the final moment in the walking at the end of the session really was Mary saying to the group, now look at his walking and look at how much better it is. And it was, he had more pendular arms, his associated reaction was less, but he was still thinking a little bit about his walking pattern through his legs and trying to do his best with that. And Mary said, right, well, we need to occupy his cortical areas with a more cortically appropriate task, and allow his postural control and his locomotor areas to deal with the locomotion. So she gave him the task of walking across the room to answer the phone, and because he was occupied, well, it wasn't answering the phone actually, she said that was a good one in the clinic situation, but it was actually because they set the situation up as if his mum had something to tell him, and he walked across the room to see what she wanted. And because he was occupied in his thinking areas about, he wondered what his mum wanted, the walking was so automatic and smooth, it was great to see. And I think for me that moment where the walking became less cortical and more posturally and locomotor central pattern generator guided was a lovely demonstration of the smoothness and the fluidity of the walking, which was great. So all in all, a really good day. I enjoyed yesterday. What we're doing today, it's the last day of the course, and we're going to look at again, carrying on with the practical, our final demonstration with Michael, and I'll be treating our patient this afternoon, which I'm looking forward to. Okay, so I'll catch up with you tomorrow. Thanks very much. Bye. Hello, it's Wednesday morning and I'm home now from the hotel. I'm back at home after leaving my Newcastle last night, and I just wanted to do a final blog about the last day of the course. It was really great. It was a great climax to the whole course, and the combination of the successful practicals, which were very interesting, and the very effective patient demonstration all came together really to bring the course, which was all about postural control and locomotion, together. So it was really great experience. 4 days of intensive work looking at the components of locomotion, and we started the day with the practical, which was led by Mary Lynch-Ellerington, and she picked up where Lena had left off the night before, looking at the intrinsic muscles of the foot and helping us to really develop the dome shape of the foot and consider the impact of the anatomy and the organisation of the intrinsic muscles around the toes, and helped us to really consider stabilising the midfoot and forefoot for the selective control of the toes, which I found very helpful, very useful. Nice to spend some time there for the activation of the foot. And then that was then used as a basis for creating a good active crook, developing the hip extension so that you can deal with some of the flexor fixation that might be going on around the hip, and then bringing that pendular leg that's created off the supine surface so that you can bring the person up into sitting and start to prepare them for standing down onto one leg. So the development of stand down to create linear extension up through the calf muscles on the basis of a more stable forefoot was a really exciting practical, and I enjoyed that one very much. And I think I had the opportunity to work with a girl called Dietland from South Africa, and we really had a good time together, considering our handling and the way that handling made our muscles activate and provided us with the stimulation that we needed for coming up into that position. So that was great. Really enjoyed that. And then we went into the I'm just gonna close the blinds slightly. Then we went into, that's better. Then we went into the workshop, the patient demo, and it was great because Mary took Michael, who had some lovely carryover from yesterday's session, and she developed the potential to go down into a very symmetrical prone standing, created some really good activation of his scapular stabilizers, which required some specific work into his rib alignment, which was great, and from that created overhead reach in that prone standing position, and then went into really organising the vertebral column and his head and neck organisation, and developing the scapular stability. So he was in this kind of position, face down onto the bench, and really developing some of the scapular stability, which was great. And then when he came up into standing, so there was some work with a football over his head, and then at one stage actually prone standing over a football-sized ball, so that she could really develop the selective flexion at his trunk in a much more symmetrical way, and then up into standing. And that session was really exciting because then she took him down into supine and generated extension around his hip, dealt with some very difficult rotational components in his plantar fascia at his foot, and created a really good foot and hip component ready for stand down. So we saw the impact of her practical teaching to us come into the patient demonstration. It was really nice. And finally, he really did well. Before the stand down, she worked on his head and neck orientation in supine, and his voice production improved because this gentleman has has had some very severe postural control issues, which of course have affected his ability to organise his thorax and his diaphragm and produce that good voice production around his larynx, as well as his swallowing and his coughing. So that was really nice to see that too, the head and neck organisation and postural control issues around there. And then he did a very successful dressing task in standing, which we had noted at the very beginning, 3 days previously, he hadn't been able to achieve as successfully. And his walking was great. He said again that it felt very much closer to normal than it had felt. His mum and dad were in on the sessions observing, and they were very excited about what they saw too. So that was thoroughly enjoyable. And then we went to our patient treatment sessions in the afternoon, where we took me and my two co-tutors took our patient into a single leg position that we used half of the bench to support her hemiplegic side and up against the wall so that she had some orientation, and that seemed to go very well, and her symmetrical walking at the end was much improved. So pleased with that too. So it was a really nice session, and then home last night on the train from Newcastle. So all in all, a really successful course, and our homework now is to produce a case study, a clinical case project, which I'll be working on regarding teaching components as if we were teaching on a basic course, and also exploring the case study format using the model of Bobath clinical practice, which of course has been developed over the last couple of years. So I'm looking forward to doing that and handing that work in. So all exciting, learning all the time. It's a continuous learning process, and developing our skills with for our patients, and for the teaching of the course participants that attend our courses at BBTA. Thanks very much for watching the blog.